Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to this last of our collections, Luncheon Talks. It's been a great series, and I think we're sort of ending with a bang, so to speak. We've got a great speaker today with a fabulous story and stories that he's going to unpack. Just a few words about this project, which actually began in about 2010 when we got a donation from a member, Cherry Bamberg, and we commenced indexing the Old Stone bank records, at what I would say is a pretty normal pace for us in the sense of, we have a tremendous amount of material in the library, all sorts of work for volunteers. And so, but managing volunteers takes time and effort. And so for a good, I'd say, almost 20 years, we were the indexing project was chugging along, and then came Ray and his posse, or whatever you want to call it, and he basically injected jet fuel into this project, which was great. And as with any sort of catalyst, it took some time to get used to it, but we are all very, very happy. And Ray's going to talk a little bit about, not only the project itself, but also, more importantly, the history that we can pull out of these projects like this. Indexing bank records doesn't sound all that romantic, but trust me, Ray will make it sound so. So Ray is a former history teacher, independent researcher. He's also sixth generation Providence lad, as he says. His forthcoming book, Embracing Hope, the Famine Irish Experience in Providence, Rhode Island, will be published this year. Ray, please take it away.
This is very, very exciting for me. Very quickly, Rick said about 24 years ago, they got the collection. Somewhere around 22 years ago, I learned about them, and I have been pursuing them ever since. There are so many hundreds of thousands of records that it wasn't a simple thing just to go in and start digging into. It is the single greatest source for Irish genealogy in 19th century Rhode Island. I'll tell you that. Now, I say for the Irish, but it also, and I say the Irish for two reasons. One is that's my area of study, and the second is that they were the first big group to come in, first group of immigrants to come in to Rhode Island and into the United States in a big, big way. However, during this period of time, these records go from 1844 to 1897. You have people from many, many countries. I've totaled 30 countries so far that they've come from, and those records are extraordinary. That's something I'm going to talk about as we go forward. Now, the story itself of the bank is fascinating. In 1819, a group of men, there's a list of the regional investors, decided to create a new kind of bank. There were many banks in Providence, as there were in all the American cities, but this was a bank for the little people. All the banks that existed up until 2 or 3 years before this time had been banks where you'd go if you had $500, you had $1,000, you had a lot of money you wanted to invest. In 1816, in Boston, a bank was created that this was modeled after, and that bank would allow the working men and working women to go and put 5 cents, 10 cents into their account whenever they could. So that is the key to what's going on here. And it's not just the little people that invested. So many people are part of this program. Here is the original Old Stone Bank. Providence Institution for Savings is what it was called. And it was built to look like the safest place in the world you could put your money. That was the main thing. And I never really gave much thought to the fact that traditional banks up until the early 20th century looked like fortresses somehow. And that was to make you feel safe. So in terms of, I just want to say one more thing about, all right, before I get into all the Irish stuff, we have a lot of regular people that invested there, but we also had a lot of people that were very famous or very wealthy. Ambrose Burnside, the general during the Civil War, right before he went to battle to take over Knoxville, Tennessee, with 18,000 men, his wife went to the bank and opened an account for him. The Lipitts, the Lucian Sharp of Brown and Sharp had an account there. A young man named William Gilbane went there. He was an immigrant from County Leitrim, and he had a small amount of money, but he had an idea to create a business. And it was opening the account at the Old Stone Bank that allowed him to start his business. Today, it's one of the biggest construction companies in the entire world, Gilbane. So we have all kinds of people going there. James Hanley, who eventually had probably the largest brewery in all of New England, was a Roscommon fellow who started his money with the bank. I am missing one. Oh, this is a letter. I'm sorry. I want to go back to this one for just a second. What the bank records have, and Rick, you're right, they seem boring, bank records. First off, in the early years, they asked your address. The city was a very small city, so if you put your name and address, they knew who you were, you came back, you could take money out of your account, put money in. You'd put down your age, occupation. Eventually, they began to ask for more material because there were so many people. A lot of them were these Irish immigrants who could barely speak English. They were coming in, and even if they could speak English, people didn't understand what they were saying. And so they started to ask for things like birthplaces. And because you had to sign the book, we have a record of who was literate and who wasn't literate. The numbers of people coming out of Ireland in the 1830s, 1840s, even into the 1870s, the percentage that was illiterate is shocking. Not shocking when you realize that their English occupiers forbid them to learn to read and write, made it impossible to have schools, did everything they could to eradicate their own language and introduced English. And so these people show up and they're very, very poorly skilled. They might be skilled in some farming work, but even that's not a strong thing for them. So in later years, the last few years, like the last maybe 4, 5, 6 years of records, we start to see the maiden names of women. We also see parents' names. And so if you have somebody who came over in the famine, as I did, and even if they died, if their siblings were still alive in the 1890s and open up a bank account, you start to find out who your ancestors were because they put down the name of the father and they put down the name of the mother with her surname. Here's a list of some of the countries that show up. This is by the 1870s. As my group has only done 50,000 out of the 525,000 records. We've done about 10%. So, and this is what we found so far with Ireland. The Irish are about 10% of the records that we're finding. And so with 55,000 records in, we've got, actually it's more than that, we've got 13,000 people from 32 countries who tell us where they come from. Roscommon and Tyrone are the biggest, but Leitrim. The other thing that's fascinating is the early Irish come in, and they come in from Ulster up in the north. And then by around 1870, we see them coming from Leitrim and Roscommon, and then Mayo and Galway in the west. We also see them coming in big numbers from Kerry and Cork and Waterford and Tipperary. You can trace, this is not just a genealogical source, but you can trace the migration, the chain migration of this group of people from the north in Ulster to the west and to the south. There's so much material that's so valuable. And incidentally, over 1,000 women signed up as domestic servants, live-in servants, and they put down their county of birth. Now, we're talking about 55,000 records that our group has transcribed. There's still 450,000 that we haven't gone through. So there's a lot of more material here. These are what the pages look like. They can be hard to read. I've had up to 20 people working on this, usually like 6 to 8 to 10 or 12 people at a time. Right now, there are 3 of us working on it because the New England Historical and Genealogical Society has transcribed the whole thing. So our project now, their project, if you want to go and see it, and thank goodness they did it, and their quality of scanning is fabulous, but it's really genealogical that they do. So if you want to find the name, you can go and find the name and you'll find the material about it, about that person. What we're trying to do is we're trying to look at trends. So we're looking at trends. We're looking at trends with all kinds of ethnic groups, but now we're concentrating on the Irish, and we can see who were neighbors, who worked at the same jobs, who came from out of the same counties, and we can also see the chain migrations that are taking place. If one can read these things without going blind, sometimes it's a challenge. So it's not just the Irish. This woman on the side here she came into the bank, and it caught my eye because she put down formerly a slave. And this woman, I'll tell a very quick story. A businessman from Rhode Island went down to, I think it was Maryland, and he was working on a project, and the guy that he was doing business with lent him this woman, Daisy, to help. So she became an assistant to this Rhode Island businessman. And what she did is Bethany Vini, she must have impressed this man because he bought her. He paid cash for her. He brought her up to Rhode Island. He immediately released her from enslavement and brought her down to the Old Stone Bank record, had her open up a bank account, taught her how to save her money and invest her money. And eventually she moved up to Worcester, and she owned a lot of properties. She had very successful businesses. She even went back down to the South and brought up relatives. She either bought them out of slavery or got them after they were freed and brought them up, and they were living in Worcester. That story comes out of just putting down formerly a slave. 3 words. On the right-hand side, you see Ambrose Burnside. He has a head of hair like mine, also a little chin, Burnsides. And anyway, he was one of the famous people that opened an account, but there were 1,500 bank accounts related to Civil War soldiers. So if you have an interest in the Civil War and you want to see when people were investing, what they were putting into the bank, it's all available to find. And incidentally, these are just the sign-in records. If you want to find out a certain person, you want to see their day-to-day banking, you can go to Robinson Library on Hope Street, and you can dig into thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of records and see the money that your ancestors or the people you're looking for invested. There's also what was interesting was the 14th Rhode Island heavy armaments. The 14th was the so-called colored group. It was the first group in the United States, I do believe, of African Americans to join during the Civil War, and they had a hard time getting pay. The pay didn't come on time. They tried to cut their pay, all the kinds of things that they would do to poor African Americans. Finally, when the pay comes through, we can see the pay comes through because their wives go down together and open bank accounts. So I have found quite a bit of information about the members of the 14th, starting with these bank records. And then you can see where they live together, where they have friendships. All this stuff can be researched out of that. So African-American history is right in here. When African-Americans would open up an account, first off, they put a C next to their name for colored, but they also put down where they were born, and sometimes more information than So I talked about the Civil War records. There are 1,500 of them available. And I talked a little bit about the domestic live-in servants. It was money that people could get to send for relatives, either to take care of them back home in Ireland or elsewhere, or to bring them over to America. In my own case, in my own family, I discovered an ancestor. She came with her older brother and her father, and they worked a day labor, made very little money, couldn't save much, but she worked as a domestic live-in servant, and she was able to send money back to the house. Now that is a proposal on my part, but I can't prove it, but I suspect it. And if you want to follow those kinds of things, it's there. It was also a very lonely life because they basically had one half of a day off. Otherwise, they weren't with their family. They weren't with their friends. They weren't speaking about everyday life that they enjoyed. They were working for the family. But at the same time, they also learned the cultural ways of the Yankees, making it easier for the Irish to fit in. So here's an example. This is just fantastic. One man came in with his son and opened a bank account and put down his address. So I went back to the records in the 19th century, very limited in Rhode Island, but I was in Ireland, but I was able to find where his farm was and a map of his farm based on 3 words that he put down in the bank account. A friend of mine who I've never met in person, but we're friends on Facebook, saw my posting and he took his drone to where this farm is. He took this photograph. He says, and I'm not sure if it's the building on the left or the right, but he said the proportions are exactly right to have been built before the famine. A lot of the famine buildings have come down. People study them. They're simple buildings, but they study them. And he's pretty convinced that this is where that fellow lived. He also, with his drone, took a couple of pictures of the farm that this man had farmed. And there it is right there. An extraordinary thing that just comes out of 3 words in the Old Stone Bank. I have found 70 people at this point that I can come very close to identifying the exact farm that they came from. You can't get this information. I've been doing this for most of my adult life. You can't get this information anywhere else. I haven't found it. Here's the bank account, the farm he had. There's the land he owned. It's or didn't own it. He rented it. They didn't sell to Irish people, particularly Irish Catholics. And then finally, I'm just going to point to this. My blog is called Federal Hill Irish because Federal Hill was originally a little Ulster. Ulster, not just being Northern Ireland, but Ulster being the province in the north of Ireland where my family came from, and a lot of the people in Providence came from. And on Federal Hill, I've been working on the history of Federal Hill under the Irish, but by the 1850s, early 1860s, you start to see some Italians show up. Not very many. This is not, this is pre-Little Italy days. And 4 brothers opened up a bank account. And I went through the different bank accounts and I came to one word. Some of them said they came from Tuscany. Then I came to one word called Barga. Well, Barga is the town they came from. So 2 years ago, I was in Tuscany, in Lucca with my wife, and determined that I would go to Barga because these brothers were all fresco painters. They were recruited by a guy named James Murphy to come and paint frescoes in the Catholic churches that they were building for all the Irish people that were coming over to southern New England. They were painting in Connecticut and Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. So I went to Barga specifically to look at the frescoes that these boys would have grown up with. And if you go to my blog, you'll see some of the pictures, some extraordinary medieval and Renaissance paintings that they had to work with. Anyway, that's my overview. I hope I haven't used too many words, but that's my overview of the Old Stone Bank. And I would like to take some questions from people.
Awesome. So we have a question from Geraldine. It is a little long and it seems like there's some context. So If Geraldine wants to ask that question herself, she's more than welcome to. Otherwise, I can read it. So, Geraldine, if you want to unmute and ask, you can. Otherwise, I'm going to get started. After reading a blurb about the new Old Stone Bank records in a recent NEHGS magazine, I checked out the database on AmericanAncestors.org. I was astonished to find several records of account holders belonging to a family of newly arrived Irish workers that migrated to Providence. This is around 1860 or so. They had previously worked in England. The records indicated that they were from County Clare. What a find. My question is whether the Mills or the Catholic Church may have promoted opening accounts.
Oh, that's a very good question. That is a very, very good question. I've been very curious about, there could have been an influence from the church. I'm thinking it's quite possible that it came out of the various businesses, because the bank was owned by a group of movers and shakers in Providence who owned industry, so it would have behooved them to sign up people. Also, the bank was open in the morning, I think from like 9 o'clock in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. Usually women went in to open accounts because they were housewives, housekeepers as they were listed, who, while their kids were either in school or working in the factories, and their husbands were working in factories, they were the ones that go downtown. But in some cases, we see them from outlying areas, and I think the bank recruited. For example, the Spragues own factories in Connecticut, and you find people in Sprague in Connecticut, and also it's called Baltic. Baltic is where there was a big Sprague factory, and you find them opening bank accounts. So they weren't getting on the train and coming into Providence to open bank accounts. I think they were being done right where they worked. And the church could have also been influenced. I have found examples of single women, and there were so many widows because, well, first off, women live longer than men anyway, generally. But men were dying, everyone was dying early, but the number of widows in Providence was huge throughout the United States. And very often a widow would open up a bank account co-signed with a local priest. So there was a guy named McCabe who was the priest at the church on Federal Hill, and in several cases, and it shows up in my blog as well, they're opening up an account. And the idea is that she kicks the bucket and the church gets the money. This sounds cynical, and I probably shouldn't put it that way, but that was the long and the short of it. They were willing their money right up front as they open bank accounts. But beyond that, it's a great question for research.
Ed Inachili says that he has a note about the Sullivan Door House that relates to your research. Ed, would you like to unmute and share?
Thank you, Ray. Because of your research, you uncovered a painter who was conscripted to come to the Sullivan Door House to paint a mural, a magnificent mural around the entire first floor and up the second floor of that house that's on your screen. His name is Michele Felice Cornet. He painted that in 1803, and I've been, after I read what you uncovered, I was dying to get in there to see the mural, and thanks to the president of the Historical Society, Morgan, she got me in there to see that mural with the current owner of the house. It is spectacular. It's been cleaned every 100 years. It gets cleaned, it seems. And Cornet then stayed here, went to Boston, became a great seascape painter. He didn't go back to Italy, as many of those artisans did. They weren't immigrants, they were artisans who came here. Thanks to your research, I found this out. He then settled in Newport, and there's a street, Courtenay Street, named after him in Newport in 1850. He passed away, I think, something like that. And that's all related to your research, that rabbit hole that I went down thanks to you, and what you've uncovered. And I'm sure there's more. In fact, he's also credited, some people say, with introducing pizza to America. Courtenay. So that there you, it keeps going, Ray. Keep going. Get your posse moving, man.
I'm on the pizza right now, Ed. It's great to see you and great to hear your voice.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. It's good
For
job.
people there, Ed and I have been communicating for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years together. We have yet to sit down and break bread, but that's going to happen one of these days.
Great pizza, you mean?
So I've got to figure out how I can get into to see this mural. But I think I see somebody on the screen that might help me. His name is Rick.
Well, you know, we actually have a painting by Cornet, at least one.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I think it was.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which we had on display not too long ago.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Ray if you could talk a little bit about the putting together the volunteers, how that happened, how you knew all these people, and what you had them doing, and maybe you could bring up that that part where you're looking at one of the pages of the manuscript on your.
So there's a page.
Yeah.
So it used to be very difficult to access the records. You could look at the records, you could take notes. This is a long, long time ago. And through some discussions I had, I finally got permission to take photographs with my phone of the records. And I took, as it turned out, about 3,000 photographs with my phone. But this is about maybe 12 years ago. So the quality of phone photography wasn't as good as it is now. So move along. I'm doing all this. I'm researching the Irish in Rhode Island. I'm writing a blog. I'm telling little stories about the unmarried women and the working men in the factories and all of that kind of stuff as I come across their stories. And it's COVID time. And what I used to do when I worked full time, I'm retired now, I used to go out to Providence, do research, look at primary material, and I would take hundreds of photographs in a short period of time, maybe a couple of hours, 3 hours. And that would give me material I could work on at home, since I live about an hour and a half away in Connecticut. So COVID comes and I can't get out anywhere. And I've just about run out of all my primary material. And then I go, hey, wait a minute, I've got all these pages. It turned out it was 3,000. I've got all these pages from the Old Stone Bank. I'll start working on them. Well, somebody must have seen it on my blog on Facebook, because a fellow up in Massachusetts said, what you should do is crowdsource. So I put the word out, and the next thing you know is I've got, I don't know, 15 or 20 people that are willing to do page by page. Of course, it was the record you're looking at on the screen now was done up in Boston, and it's really clear. The ones that I have were also sometimes fuzzy because I would go out and take 300 or 400 pictures in an hour or 2 hours, and then scramble back to go to work. And so eventually what happened is we went up to Hope Street, and we were able to do our own scanning with Rhode Island Historical Society's scanners. But then when Rick and I met with the New England Historical Genealogical Society, the quality of their scanning is extraordinary. And Rick and those people came to an agreement to get it all scanned and get it transcribed. And the wonderful thing is there's no paywall. Rick was insistent upon that anybody can go and look at these records. You have to sign in. You got to as a guest. You doesn't cost you a penny. And then you can, no matter where you are in the world, you can look at these records. So that, in a nutshell, that's how it happened. We crowdsourced and came up with a lot of material.
So it's fabulous, Ray. Thank you. And can you just say a couple of words about some of the things that has surprised you about this, like what has come out of this project that has surprised you, and what have been some of the challenges of getting 20 or so people to enter the same kinds of things in the same I mean just the workflow. There's it's not just as easy as saying, hey everybody, let's go put on a show. It's actually the organizational challenge is pretty.
It is. When I first started doing it, I did have close to 20 people that I was organizing, and they would. We didn't have the easy way of getting the pages, so I would email them the page, and they would fill it out. We were on Google Drive, so I could take their information. I would get so many people writing into, not so many people, but I would get so many transcriptions coming in, and we had to proof them all. That eventually I turned the leadership over to Casey Zahn, who helped tremendously. And then later on, I went back when I could handle it. I get my head around it again. It was a little bit challenging. Things that really surprised me. From Irish research, it's the change in the migration patterns of the first people of the Irish. The reason they came to Providence was they were textile workers, skilled textile workers coming out of Ulster. And starting with Samuel Slater's factory in the 1790s, they needed weavers, they needed skilled workers. And so they recruited people, and those people came over. As far as the makeup, they were probably mostly Protestant at the time, but they weren't exclusively Protestant. They were Protestant Catholic, and there's two groups there that historically don't get along well. And then what happened was, by the 1830s, people, and this is where the church comes in, people need to get out of Ireland. The population is growing. They don't have enough land to farm. This is before the famine. And so I suspect that it's the Catholic priests that are saying, well, John McKenna is working at a factory in Providence, and if you go there, he can probably help you get a job. And then when the famine hits, it's like all these people out of Ulster, they're not skilled workers. They're barely alive. A lot of them don't speak English, they speak Irish. Even the ones that speak English, you can't understand what they're saying. And I've come across things where people complain, like people in banks would complain that these people can't even pronounce their names, let alone write them. And then later on, you have people coming in from other areas. And that's a whole area that could be researched. Other things that surprised me, I don't know if it surprised me, but the first Italians that are coming from the north. They're coming out of Liguria, which is in the northwest, up near Genoa. They're coming out of Tuscany, which is nearby. And then, of course, by the 1880s and 1890s, I haven't gotten into those records yet, but we're going to see a lot of people coming from Calabria, from Apulia, from Sicily, from Campania, from Naples. And there's that shift. And so the original people, as you had pointed out, Rick, they're coming over, they're artisans or they're skilled workers. And they're doing very, very well as tailors, as painters, as restaurateurs. If it was a time in the 1840s and 50s, if you wanted to get good food, there was a guy up in the north part of Providence, and he was the guy who would cater your events, and he was Italian, and he was from the north. And I can't think of his name at the moment. I'm sorry, Ed. Ed and I talk about this sort of stuff. And I continue to be amazed. Just in the last couple of weeks, I have found, because in the 1890s, people were signing up with their parents' names, and I've found more of my ancestors, and I've been able to actually come closer to actually seeing where they come from. In terms of that, I am mostly Irish and mostly from Rhode Island, and I have walked on the farmland, and this isn't because of this project, but it has to do with my research. I've walked on the farmland of ancestors in County Monaghan, met with my cousins. This is 170 years later, and I've actually sat in the kitchen of my great-great-great-grandfather in his farmhouse on 161 acres in County Roscommon. This is going to open it up to the point where people can go and actually go back specifically to those places. And if you're famine Irish, it's almost impossible to know where you came from, because our ancestors were embarrassed at their poverty. They were hurt from what was done to them. They tried to cover it up. They tried to tell people they were English, or they were mutts, or they were this, or they were that. And so for most of us, we have to do the research to find out the answers. And there are a lot more things that I find, and I'll probably think of later on, but these records blow my mind. I've never seen anything like them. And I've been looking for 40 years, I would guess.
Margaret Foster brings up that it's interesting to see on this page that there are children who have accounts at the bank.
There are. It was very common for people to open up accounts for children when they were born. Yes, you can see the McCormicks there, a good Irish name, and they're opening up accounts for their kids to protect them. You'll also find kids that are 9 and 10 years old, they're opening up accounts with their own money that they're making because they're working in a factory. They're working not the 14 hours a day, but they're working 10 or 12 hours a day, and they're 10 years old in a factory, and they open up accounts. Yeah, and that's another thing is one guy that I'm working with now, who's David Adams, who's doing a lot of transcriptions for me. One of the things he keeps coming across and pointing out are these little children that are opening their own bank accounts, and they're working in places like American Screw Company or other really heavy industry places. Shocking, but that was the reality.
Jane Hennedy says that this is amazing research, and have you come across anyone living in South County?
Oh, that's a good question. I have come across people in South County. I've come across people in Kent County. It seems to me that I've seen a lot of East Greenwich records. I've seen some from South County. I see some from Newport County. Bristol County shows up pretty commonly. You also find people from over the border in the Blackstone River Valley, the English, the Massachusetts towns that go up the river. I've seen people from New Bedford, from Fall River, from Foxborough. And here's another thing that a historian could get into. It seems to me that as the trains expand, it is possible to be in Eastern Connecticut and get on a train and come into Providence and open up your bank account. Or take the train over from Fall River to open up a bank account. Just speculation, but yeah, there's obviously the biggest concentration is in Providence, but it's also in all the satellite towns, the villages of Burrowville, for example, up in Cumberland and Smithfield. There are a lot of people, Warwick, Cranston, there are a lot of people that are opening accounts that have addresses there. The other thing I would say that's good about if you're researching somebody in Providence, one of the things that's very, very helpful is the Providence City directories, because they're pretty darn good at listing people. If you're in other towns, if you're in Cranston or Warwick, or you're up in Cumberland, there's no city directory for you. So this is a source that people need to look at as well if they're doing genealogical work. And very, very importantly, this is both a genealogical masterpiece, but also historical. And my history friends sometimes don't like to talk about genealogists, and genealogists, well, I don't know what they say about historians, but it's intertwined, particularly when you get into the stories of the little people.
Those,
yeah.
those street guides or those those city directories are being digitized as we speak. So just FYI.
Excellent, excellent. They're the best.
And we have a question from Carol Ansel, which might be a nice note to end on. What's the basic organization of the records, and where do you start?
Oh, that's a good question. If you want to find out about the names of people, if you have a certain person, John Mann, that you're looking for, or McMahon, the New England Historical Genealogical Society's website is a place to go. If you Google NEHGS, an Old Stone Bank, it'll bring you right up. You can go into the records. They will ask you to sign up. There's no paywall. You're not going to have to pay anything, but you do have to sign up as a guest. And when you go back, they'll ask you to sign in again. And then you can type in the names of anybody you're looking for, and you'll find you'll if they're there, you'll find them. You can also go to federalhillirish.com. I've got about 55,000 records up online. They're broken down by year, so you can take the spreadsheet for a particular year, let's say 1863, copy it, and then you can search by address, you can search by name, you can search by occupation, you can search by employer, and you can search by county in Ireland or wherever they are. There are Russian Jews that show up, there are Polish Jews that show up, there are well, Italians I mentioned, there's Scandinavians, there are people from all over the place, Germans, and sometimes the addresses get to be fairly specific. Sometimes they're general, Prussia, boom, you know, but sometimes they'll put down a town. And in one case, I found a person who had a town that was listed as, I think it was listed as Poland, no, it was listed as Russia, but now it's Poland. So that material is in there. Just hope that they signed up before the end of 1897 when we don't have those records after that.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the Love Our Collection series and for this talk in particular. Thank you, Ray, for being with us and sharing all of this amazing information. And thank you, Rick, for adding so much wonderful context to this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to present this. I'm thrilled, and I'm so happy to share it with everybody.
Great. Well, we hope to see everyone at some upcoming programs. And until then, enjoy the rest of your day.